Good morning. Our learning is Leila Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kaman Ruvain and Shamash Aliyah. Okay, so we are on Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Hopefully, get to the bottom of the Amud, touch upon one of the greatest controversies of the past 2 centuries in Judaism. Okay, hopefully we'll get there. Okay, so there you go. So Amar Mar. So we're still learning again today. We're until we get to the Mishnah. We're discussing different limudim about the conflict between bris milah and tzaras. So Amar Mar, it was said above Basar. The pasuk says there's an extra word Basar, flesh. Af pi sheyesham beheres yimal. Divra be Yoshia. So if Yoshia says from the word Basar, we learn that if there is a bris milah, if a person needs a bris, if there's a child or an adult who needs a bris, and there is tzaras in the place where the bris has to take place, and by performing the circumcision is going to take off the tzaras, you're allowed to do so because of the word Basar. Ask the Gemara, Halama likra, why do you need a pasuk? Davar she'en miskaven. It's something which you don't intend, but davar she'en miskaven mutter. We know, as we recall, we had a machlokes, which we'll touch upon in a second, but we have an opinion which says if I don't intend to do something, then I'm allowed to do it, right? If my intention over here is the bris milah, my intention is not to remove the beheres. My intention is not to remove the tzaras. My intention is to go ahead and to give a bris milah. So even though it's true that the tzaras is going to be removed, it's not my intention. Right? And we saw davar she'en miskaven mutter. So Abaye says, you're right. Lo nitzricha el Rabbi Yehuda. Damar davar she'en miskaven asur. He says, you're right. Rav Yoshia, who said we need the pasuk Basar, is specifically going within the view of Rav Yehuda, who says that even when something is not intended, it's still going to be forbidden, right? So this is, right, or again, this is the machlokas with the pulling of the bench, right? So Rava says, no. Afilu temer Rav Shimon. Even if you want to say that it's Rav Shimon, he also needs a pasuk. Why? Moder of Shimon b'sik reish v'lo yamos. We saw earlier many times throughout the Masechta that Rav Shimon agrees that if something is inevitable, then it's still going to be aser, right? The machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon about davar she'en miskaven is if it's not inevitable. If I'm dragging a bench and it may or may not create a groove that is going to then you have a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon, who just says still, since it might create the groove, it's going to be aser, even though it's not your intention. Rav Shimon says if you might create the groove, even if it does create the groove, that's fine. Since it's not inevitable and it's not your intention, it's mutter. But as Rava points out, that even Rav Shimon would agree if something is inevitable. If a person's getting a bris milah, by definition, they're cutting off the beheres. It's even though it's not their intention, it is going to necessarily happen. And there, even Rav Shimon, who normally holds that something that you don't intend is permitted, over here he would agree that it's going to be forbidden, and that's why you need the word basar to say that even though it's inevitable, right? You still need a pasuk to say that it's going to be allowed. Ask the Gemara of Abaye Leisle Hasvara of Abaye Rava Darmi Tarbaya Moder of Shimon b'Psik Reish Yamos. We saw many times that Abaye and Rava both agree that Rav Shimon says that when it's inevitable, then davar she'en miskaven is going to be aser. So why is it that a moment ago Abaye said that it's only for Rav Yehuda? He should say Rav Shimon also. So Gemara says you're right. Basar d'Shama me Rava Svara. Abaye. This was the original discussion. Abaye initially thought that Rav Shimon says davar she'en miskaven is going to be mutter across the board, and then he hears Rava saying that no, when it's inevitable, then Rav Shimon would agree that it's forbidden. And when he heard that, he changed his tune and he said, "You're right." Rav Shimon he changed his view and he agreed with Rava and said that when there's a psik resha, when something is inevitable, then even Rav Shimon would say davar she'en miskaven is going to be aser. So this is the original time where Abaye changed his view. Okay, fine. Let's go a little further. A different version, which has a bit of a different implication. Ika demas lahada Abaye v'Ravaha. There are those who teach this disagreement of Abaye and Rava regarding the following. In other words, there is a tradition that Abaye and Rava had a certain dialogue. The question was, what was it in the context of? So we just had one version. Now we're going to have a slightly different version. The pasuk says, and here's the version. Hishamar benega tzara how tzaras lishmar ma'o la'asos v'la'asos. The pasuk says, take heed, meaning be careful, concerning the affliction of tzaras, to be very careful and to do. What is the word to do? La'asos. So iyata osa, to do says you can't intentionally cut it off. Aval osa ata b'siv shal gabe raglo. You're allowed to go ahead and put something on your foot. Uvamot shal gabe sefer. You're allowed to put a pole, lift weights. Vim avra, and if it comes off, it comes off. So in other words, what they're learning from la'asos means you can't do so intentionally. But if I'm, doing something that's rub, I'm holding some very heavy load on my shoulder, and my tzaras on my shoulder, it's going to come off, even though I know it's going to come off, that's allowed. Ask the Gemara of Alama Likra, why do I need a pasuk to teach this? Davar she'en miskaven hu. At the end of the day, if I'm lifting weights or I'm carrying a heavy load, I'm not intending to do so. But davar she'en miskaven mutter, and something which is unintentional is permitted. So why do I need the pasuk of la'asos? Yeah, you with me? Right? So again, Lasos teaching me that I'm only not allowed to take it off deliberately. I can't go to the surgeon and say, hey, take it off. But if I'm going ahead and doing activity which is going to rub it off, I know it's going to rub it off, it's permitted. Ask the Gemara, why do I need such a pasuk? So Amar Abaya, now we plug in that discussion between Abaya and Rava. So Amar Abaya, L'nitzcha el Rabbi Yehuda, damar shem eskavein aser. So you're right. The only reason we need this pasuk is because this brisa was going like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds unintentional action is going to be forbidden. V'Rav Amar afilu tim Rav Shimon. Even if you want to say it, that pasuk is needed according to Rav Shimon. Umoder Rav Shimon b'sik reishav lo yamas. Rav Shimon agrees when something is inevitable. Ask the Gemara again, the same dialogue. V'Abaya leisle haisvar. Doesn't Abaya agree to this understanding? V'Abaya v'Rava darmi tarvayu. Moder Rav Shimon b'sik reishav lo yamas. That both Abaya and Rava agree when something is inevitable. So Gemara says, you're right. Levasar d'sham mirava svara. After Abaya heard this, then he accepted it. Okay, so bottom line is, according to this version, what's the consequence? What's the difference between this version and the version before? There's a big difference. According to this version, what comes out is that the pasuk is actually allowing any activity that is not intentional. When it comes to tzaras, in other words, like this. When it comes to, normally, we're coming up with the final understanding of this is like this. Both Abai and Rav agree that Rav Shimon agrees that when something is inevitable, even if it's not your intention, it's forbidden. Right? So the example we gave is, let's say you're dragging...
Past the house that has an automatic light.
That is a great example. So no, well, yes and no. So there gets a little bit different because of the question of lo ich bislei. In other words, there I couldn't care less for it. So the example we gave is like so just going back to your example, it's an important discussion about this because that is a class example of davar shen miskaven. So if it's not my house, if I'm walking back by my neighbor's house, I don't want that light to go on. Right? It's completely unimportant to me, and maybe I don't even want it at all. So therefore, that would be permitted. Again, ideally you should avoid it, but be permitted. If I know I'm stuck and was I over anything? Not at all. Right? Not at all. So you'd be allowed to do so. Sometimes you're stuck. Sometimes the only way to get by. So it's davar shem miskaven and v'lo ich bislei. You couldn't care less. It's not good for you at all. If you're the owner, right? We spoke about a ring, right? You spoke about the alarms where if it has a little flashing light. So I go to my neighbor. Oh, they have the ring and they forgot to deactivate. I know they didn't deactivate it. Am I allowed to go to the door? And the answer is 100%, because it's davar shen miskaven and lo ich bislei. I couldn't care less. If you're the owner, you're not allowed to do so, because the owner cares about that light. Not for them per se. They don't need it for them, but they want it because if the sketchy guy shows up and they're going to start looking around, they want that light to show up to show them that it's activated. So if the owner should be using the back door, right? So that's a new category of lo ich bislei. We're not talking about lo ich bislei. We're talking about a case where it's beneficial to them, right? If it's tzaras, maybe it's not their intention, but who wants tzaras, right? Of course they want the tzaras. So that's where we're talking about a case where it does have benefit to the person. So it's not lo ich bislei, it's on that unique category. And there what we're saying is that both Abai and Rava agree that Rav Shimon agrees to Rav Yehuda that in that case davar shem miskaven is going to be aser. Right? Now, the one exception based on this brisa is when it comes to tzaras, the only prohibition of tzaras is kavana. Meaning, normally, if I dig a groove in the ground, let's say it just rained, and I'm dragging a bench right there, and I know it's going to make a groove. Rav Shimon would agree that it's going to be aser. That's psik reisha. But in a case of tzaras, because the word la'asos, what comes out is that it's only if that's my intention. But if I'm going ahead and taking like a basket on my back or lifting weights where it's going to constantly rub against it over and over and over again, and I know it's going to happen. Right? And I want it to happen because the pasuk says lasos, I'm allowed to do so. Fine. That's so. Whereas according to the first brisa, it's limited to bris milah. The second brisa is saying it's true for all activities. Okay, fine. Amar Mar. Let's analyze the brisa a little bit more. The earlier brisa we quoted. Yom tov eno doche ela bismano b'vad. When it comes to Yom Tov, you're only a bris milah bismano. A bris milah of the 8th day is able to override Yom Tov and Shabbos, of course. Not of course, but and Shabbos. But it's not able to override Yom Tov. And if it can't override Yom Tov, it certainly cannot override Shabbos. So meaning if the 8th day is Friday, for whatever reason, the baby's not ready, the baby's whatever yellow, you can't do the bris on Friday. You are not allowed to do the bris on Sukkot. You're not allowed to do the bris on Shabbos. When I asked Menani Mili, what's the source for this? Who says maybe you could do the bris on this day? Amar Chizkiya b'chein tanad b'chizkiya Amar Kra. So we're going to give a bunch of different sources based on different halachos and apply it to bris milah. So one source is lo sasir meno ad boker. Okay, so basically we're talking about a leftover of the karban pesach, and what happened? There's a halacha, you have to eat the entire karban that night. It's critical you eat the entire karban. No leftovers the karban pesach. What happens if you do have leftovers? You have to do what? You have to burn it, right? Now, when do you burn it? Do you burn it the next morning, which is still Yom Tov, right? or do you burn it another time? Says the Gemara. The pasuk says, it doesn't quote the whole pasuk, but it says, I'm going to read it in English. You shall not leave any of it until morning, ad boker, and that which is left of it until morning, you shall burn in fire. Now that's a little repetitive, right? It says, don't leave anything until morning, and that which is left until morning, burn in fire. It could have said, don't leave anything until morning, and if you do, burn it. But it says, until morning twice. Why? Shein tamalomer ad boker. It's not necessary to say until morning the second time. Ma tamalomer ad boker. What is the meaning of, what is the function of until morning the second time? Ba'kasav litin lo boker sheni l'sreifaso. Teach me that I have to wait until morning number 2 to burn it. Meaning, if I have a Karban Pesach and I did not finish it on Pesach night, normally if I have if I have leftovers of any Karban, I burn it right away. Over here, I'm not allowed to burn it on the first morning of Yom Tov. I have to burn it on the second day, which in Eretz Yisrael is not Yom Tov, it's Chol Hamoed, right? So what do you see? You see when something is not in its perfect time, in its ideal time, you don't do it in its, you don't do it on Yom Tov. It doesn't override Yom Tov. So similarly, right, it's not identical, but similarly with the Bris Milah, it's not its ideal time. Right, you can't go, just like you can't burn something on the first morning, you have to wait until Chol Hamoed. So too, you would not be allowed to do the Bris Milah on the day of Yom Tov. If it's not the ideal time, you'd have to do it the next time. Okay, yeah. Here, Abai Amar Kra, Ola Shabbos b'Shabbata, v'lo Olas Chol b'Shabbos, v'lo Olas Chol b'Yom Tov. Okay, so basically here we have a discussion about the Karban Ola, right? The Karban Tamin. Karban Tamin is brought every single day, and normally when there is something which is left over from the Karban Ola, which is not perfectly consumed, let's say today on Wednesday, if they do not finish, if the entire Karban Tamid does not finish getting burnt, what they normally do is you'd burn it that night. Okay, it's not its regular day, right? But the leftovers you burn at nights. But we're taught when it comes to Shabbos, you don't do, let's say Friday afternoon's leftover Ola offering does not get burnt on Shabbos. Okay, so what do you see? You see when it's the leftover piece, the leftover, when it's not its right time, right? The Ola offering is supposed to be burnt each day. The leftover, which is not its day, needs to be burnt, but it's not its ideal day. You don't do it on the next day when it falls out on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. Similarly, the Bris Milah, when it's on its day, you do it. When it's not on its day, you don't do it. Okay? Same type of concept. Rav Amar Kra, Hu levado yaseh lachem. Okay, no more work may be done. Only Ochel Nefesh is allowed to be done. Who, the word who, teaches me, v'lo machshirin, that which is allowed to be done, it itself, but not the things which are preparatory. This does not go like Rabbi Eliezer. We talk machlokas in the Mishnah between Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva. So preliminaries for food preparation should not be done. By the way, this is halach l'maisa when it comes to, and this is why we don't why don't you turn on a fire on Shabbos? Right? Meaning, on Yom Tov, right? On Shabbos, but on Yom Tov, right? So on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do anything allowed for cooking. Why can't I turn my fire on Yom Tov? I'm allowed to do other malachs. I'm allowed to shech the cow. I'm allowed to salt the cow. I'm allowed to go ahead and put the cow on a fire. Why can't I turn the fire on? What's the big deal, right? One's malacha, one's not malacha. The answer is that I can't do anything which I could have done before. Anything which could have done before, and it would make no difference, I can't do now. So if I cook something or bake something on a fire which is turned on, if I turn my oven on before Yom Tov, does the food taste any different if I turn my oven on before Yom Tov or I turn my oven on Yom Tov? Absolutely not. The food's going to taste the same. If I slaughter a cow today or tonight, it's going to make a difference. It's more fresh. If I bake a cake Erev Yom Tov or on Yom Tov, it makes a difference because it tastes more fresh if I bake it now. So anything which I could have done with absolutely no difference before, I'm not allowed to do. And that's why we're not allowed to turn on a fire, we're not allowed to light a flame on Yom Tov for this reason. Yeah.
When I go to the butcher and buy a piece of cow, right? It might have been shechted 3 days ago.
That's because you have an unsophisticated palate. I'm just kidding. No, but for real, that's the real answer. The real answer is that you and I both couldn't taste the difference whatsoever. But a meat connoisseur, if you go, the people in the know, people who read Fleisch magazine, they will tell you that I could tell the difference between something slaughtered today, right? But we could all tell the difference between a cake baked yesterday or 2 days ago and today. More or less, right? So the point is, anything where freshness going, probably the only example they give, like the classic example they give as an exception is like Jell-O. You can't make Jell-O on Yom Tov because Jell-O really doesn't taste different if it was made yesterday or made today. Most foods, though, depends how sophisticated the palate is. Some foods it's easier for us to tell the difference. Some foods not, but that's. Taste the exact same. Okay, the question is, what malacha are you going to do? But yeah, if you're going to be doing toche, it depends on what malacha. I don't know. Depend what goes in. Okay, we have to go.
Measuring, but I'm saying people make that on Yom Tov because it's just like you run out of time or Yom Tov. But I don't know. Maybe we should be making dressings before.
Could be dressing would be an example. I'm not sure if is that true. I guess right. You leave dressings for years. Yeah, months. Yeah. That's true. What was that?
Depends what dressing.
It certainly depends on the dressing. Yeah. Yeah. If it's something which really has no difference. Yeah. You'd have to. A vinaigrette, right. Any vinegar thing might have really taste not. It wouldn't taste different at all. I mean, at some point you're gonna throw it. Well,
Only because it's sophisticated.
I don't want to take
it's a sophisticated palate. Yeah. Okay. And
What you do is you mix it, and that separates anyway.
Right.
right. So I think Murray's pointing out. Reading. It depends. First, we have to figure out if you establish is there malacha involved at all. Meaning. Depends on what you're doing. Again, we could go through the particulars, meaning it might be that this dressing, you're not going to be over any sturm to begin with. So it could be you could do it on Shabbos, theoretically. I don't know. So then you could do it. Meaning the only question is, if it's already a malacha, right, shechting a cow, putting on a fire, that's a malacha. So then you have to ask, could it have been done yesterday? If the answer is yes, then you can't do it. But if it's I don't know, it depends on the particulars of dressing. If it's something where you're going to be like lush, you're going to be mixing it in, and that's more like a mayonnaise type of thing, then whatever. Then there might be some question. Yeah. Okay. Where are we? Okay, huvla machshirin, right? So huvla machshirin, levado. So what is the word levado? Who levado? Yes, that's again. Who teaches me that the preliminaries for food preparation cannot be done? Okay, levado v'lo mila shlo bezmana. The word levado teaches me that I can't do a mila not in its right time to ask kavachomer, which I would have learned from a kavachomer, meaning the kavachomers that we learned previously, to say that it should override yamtiv. The word levado teaches me it does not. Okay, fine. So that's another source. Rav Ashi, another source. Shabbason. Okay, so it's talking about Yom Tov, saying that the Yom Tov should be a day of rest. Asehu, that there is an asay to rest on Yom Tov. Vavele Yom Tov asay velos asay. Therefore, Yom Tov, to rest on Yom Tov, there is a negative prohibition not against doing malacha, and an asay that you must rest. Vein asay of bris milah, the positive commandment of mitzvah of bris milah, does not docha as los asay v'asay, is not able to override the negative and positive commandment. So in other words, even though it's true that doing a bris milah, if you do a bris milah on day 9, or day 10, or day 100,000, you're still getting a mitzvah. Right? It's still a mitzvah, but it's an assay, it's one mitzvah. And we said yesterday, one positive mitzvah overrides a negative mitzvah, right? The notion of love, this sounds like very, whatever, but the Ramban says that the notion of love of Hashem, which is the assay, overrides the awe of Hashem, the standing back. But when it comes to assay, one positive mitzvah, and you have assay and los assay on the other side, you can't override it, and therefore, unless there's a special pasuk which says, day 8, yes, that allows us to override it, but otherwise, simply it's one assay of doing the mitzvah bris milah, and it's the assay and the los assay of rest on Yom Tov, and therefore it can't override it, and of course the same would be for Shabbos. One way or another, 4 different possible sources, but everyone agrees that a bris milah that is not in its regular time cannot override Yom Tov or Shabbos, and that's the accepted halacha. Okay, let's wrap up the last Mishnah. The Mishnah concluded by saying, Klal Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva said, as opposed to Rabbi Eliezer, who said that you're allowed to do any of the preliminaries for bris milah can be done before on Shabbos itself. Right? Rabbi Eliezer's community went so far. People who held like Rabbi Eliezer went so far as they cut down trees. Right? They wanted to show how permitted it is. They cut down trees on Shabbos and they burnt the wood and they took the coals. And they made a knife on Shabbos so that they could do all the preliminaries on Shabbos to do a bris milah, right? They went quite far. Rabbi Kiva said no, similar to what we said by food. Just like by food, anything that could have been done yesterday cannot be done today. Rabbi Kiva says if you could get a knife yesterday, you can't get a knife today. If you could schlep the knife over to the place you're going to do the bris milah, then you can't schlep it today. Right? Fine. You can't go ahead and move those things because that would not be allowed to be done. And okay, if you ever notice Rabbi Rappaport. So Rabbi Rappaport, you're allowed to carry, you're allowed to carry it l'tzorach mitzvah. So it's for a slightly different reason. I shouldn't mention this because it's a little confusing. But after the bris milah on Shabbos, he'll leave his stuff there because there's no justification to carry it anymore. Meaning to carry it, we have an eruv over here. Obviously, he carries it to where he's going. But there it's l'tzorach. He needs it. But afterwards, if he has no function, no use for it, so he leaves his little briefcase box thing in the place of the bris milah. Again, not for this exact reason, but more because there's no use for it anymore. He doesn't have any justification for carrying it. Okay, fine. Rav Yehuda Marav halacha Rabbi Kiva. The halacha is like Rabbi Kiva, and that's the way we rule. We do not cut down trees. We do not go ahead and make knives. Anything that could have been done before has to be done before. Okay. Utnan nami gabi Pesach kagavna. We also have the same discussion by Karban Pesach. Klal Rabbi Kiva kal malacha she'efshar lo la'asos erev Shabbos in adochas Shabbos. Anything which could have been done when it comes to Karban Pesach, which falls out when Friday, when Erev Pesach, when the 14th, when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, right? So you need to do certain things. You can eat the Korban Pesach the night, and certain things override Shabbos, certain things do not. So anything which could have been done Erev Shabbos, Eino Dochas Shabbos, does not override. Shechita, Erev Shabbos, you can't do Shechita a day early, right? You have to shecht on the 14th, so you shecht on the 14th. You couldn't have done it on a day early on Friday, right? So Shechita is Dochas Shabbos from Ibn Rav, Halacha Rabbi Kiva, Halacha is like Rabbi Kiva. Utzricha, and we need both cases, both Bris Milah and Pesach, because you would not have learned one from the other. Yes, Milah Fad, I just learned Milah, and Rabbi Kiva said it over there. Hasam Hud Machshir Efshir Lasos Metma Lo Dachu Shabbos Deleka Kares. Maybe by Milah. Maybe by Milah, it was taught over there because there's no kares if you don't do Milah right away. About Pesach, Dika kares. Pesach, if you miss Korban Pesach, there is kares. The punishment for missing Korban Pesach is kares, which is very stringent, strict punishment. So Eimalitchu Shabbos, maybe Pesach would override Shabbos, even the preliminaries. V'yesh b'nei Gabi Pesach, had you just heard Rabbi Akiva say, or Rabbi Yehuda ruling like Rabbi Akiva by Pesach, Mishum Delo Nichsu Alei Shloshes Krisos, Aval Mila Nichsu Alei Shloshes Krisos, he would say that by Korban Pesach, there I don't do the preliminaries because it's not as stringent as Bris Milah, because Bris Milah has something unique that has 13 brisos. We saw that Bris Milah is like associated 13 times it says bris. Maybe specifically by Bris Milah, Eimelut Shabbos, maybe Aval Milah Nichsu Alei Shloshes Krisos Eimelut Shabbos by Bris Milah where it says 13 krisos, 13 covenants. Maybe that would override. Right? Tzricha, therefore, by each of them they have a stringency, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda had to say both times, both by Korban Pesach as well as by Bris Milah, that the preliminaries do not override Shabbos despite their unique stringencies. The bottom line is halachas like Rabbi Akiva by both. Okay? Now let's start the next Mishnah, and here we get to the controversy. Okay. Osin kol tzorchei milah b'Shabbos. Let's do all the necessities of circumcision on Shabbos. What are the necessities of Bris Milah? Mo'alin, you do the circumcision. That makes sense. Okay, uforin, you uncover the corona, right? That is the second step of the bris milah, right? One is cutting the foreskin, and then they pull back the skin that covers the member, right? You pull it back, and then umotitzin, and you draw the blood. Those words, umotitzin, we'll come back to in a moment, hopefully we'll have time. Drawing the blood, is that an integral part of the bris milah or not? And why is that controversial? Because, for a lot of reasons. But let's keep on reading. You're allowed to place a bandage and cumin on it. Now, do we place cumin on a bris milah on a child who just had a bris milah? Absolutely not. Fine. We do a lot of funny things. We've not placed the molds not take cumin. Why? Because that was medical practice at the time. They understood. They thought the cumin. What they believed, and that was the science at the time. Cumin must be put on the bris milah, and therefore, for medical reasons, you're allowed to do it, right? So that's a necessity based on medical reasons. But if it's not medical practice at the time, you don't have to do it, right? And the rest of the list is going to be similarly. Imlo shachak me'erev Shabbos. You didn't crush the cumin erev Shabbos. Let's just raw. Lowest b'shin of anosin. You crush it with your teeth. You don't do it in a mortar. You touch it in your teeth and you apply it to lo tarf yain v'shem erev Shabbos. If you didn't vigorously mix wine and oil, which is a uvda dechol, it's a weekday activity to mix it vigorously. You place the wine by itself. You place the oil by itself. You don't make a bandage before Shabbos. You don't make it on Shabbos. You're allowed to wrap a piece of cloth around it. Imlo hiskin erev Shabbos, didn't prepare the ordinary cloth before Shabbos and carry it to where the bris milah is. Maybe you're allowed to wrap it around your finger and carry it in a awkward fashion. Even from a different courtyard, to be allowed to do so. Okay, so basically you're allowed to do all the medical things that are needed. You're allowed to do all the halachic things that are needed. Now the medical things, if they're not in the medical things of the day, you don't do it. What about mitzitza? Is mitzitza a medical thing or is that a halachic thing? So this is a major debate. The first time it shows up, let's do this very, very briefly. The first time it shows up is in Germany, where Shiloh was asked to the Chasam Sofer about where Shiloh was asked if there were some diseases that were being transferred by the Moel doing mitzitza. The question was, do you have to do mitzitza? And he said, no, mitzitza is a medical thing, and it's not an integral part of the bris milah. He says, use a sponge he said, whatever, you can use a sponge. Now he acknowledges, he says there are Kabbalistic sources which say the mitzitza is 100% part of the medical, part of the spiritual elements, part of the mitzvah elements of the thing. He says that's Kabbalah. We don't have to deal with that, especially if it deals with we're not 100% sure about that. That's a Kabbalistic reason. It's not the simple read of the Mishnah. And therefore he says, we don't have to do mitzitza, certainly not with our mouth, which was the standard. You can use a sponge to draw out the blood, for medical purposes, to make sure there's no blood clotting, whatever, and that's all you have to do. Okay, this became a firestorm of a controversy, especially in the time, because many were pushing against bris milah because of it was done by the reform movements, which were trying to, change things which were seen as quote unquote barbaric, and so this became a major debate, and even the Talmidim of the Chasam Sofer debated if that's what he really held, and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe he would have changed his mind had he known how much controversy and pushback there was. Eventually, Rav Hirsch came along and introduced this notion of a tube to do mitzitza with your mouth, but to do it with a tube which wouldn't put the mouth directly on the bris milah, and that was his position. Okay, this became a major controversy, and still is a controversy to this day, but it seems like the simple read is that it's not a halachic necessity, it is a medical purpose, and you would be allowed to do mitzitza certainly with a tube, would certainly be accepted. There are those who argue and say, no, it must be done by the mouth, and we'll leave it at that. Have a great day.